So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to very much welcome Abigail E. Disney to Sydney. Abby has been travelling and has spent time in Melbourne already this week. And Abby, we invite you to talk to us about your life. And I would like to perhaps start to get to know. Abby said to me earlier, there's always an elephant in the room, and it is Dumbo. We're going to start with the Disney part of it. So, Abby, can you tell us about being a Disney?
I was born in Los Angeles. I was a feisty tomboy. I'm very proud of that, actually. Broke a girl's nose in the first grade. With my fist. That wasn't an accident, mind you. It was very much on purpose. And I was the first girl in Southern California to play on the boys, you would call it football, soccer team, which was a very big deal. And the day after I did that, the principal told me I was an embarrassment to the school, and that she would expel me if I ever did it again. 1975.
It was the same ladylike?
Yeah. And I was MVP in 3 sports my senior year of high school. So that was the Abigail before the toadstool Disney part started to kind of become very much part of my consciousness. There was a lot in being a Disney growing up that was so wonderful, I can't even describe to you. I mean, to give you an example, my grandfather, Roy, who was the business part of the company, was genuinely the nicest person on this earth, and I worshipped him. And I sat next to him when the first boat went through the first Small World ride at Disneyland, and you know, and I cry still to this day every time I go through that ride thinking about him, because I miss him that much still. And we used to go in. He used to let me sit on his lap and use the steering wheel around the parking lot. I would take us around the parking lot, and he would tell me exactly what attendance was, because he could look at the parking lot and say what attendance was within about 50 people. He was usually right, which was pretty extraordinary. And sometimes we go what they call backstage at Disneyland. Backstage just means off, you know. And back in the early days of Disneyland, there was only one guy in the Mickey Mouse costume, and it was a very primitive costume. It really was just a suit and a head. It's a little more sophisticated than that now. And I will never forget the day I came backstage with my grandfather, and Mickey Mouse was sitting with his head on the table next to me, kind of flirting with Snow White. And he saw my grandmother. He was like this tiny guy with a voice like this, which is why the guys in costumes don't talk, actually, because the first guy you couldn't have him talk. He would sound like Mickey Mouse. He saw my grandmother and he said, Edna, so glad to see ya. I will never forget that. Seared in my brain. So I was conscious of being a little bit of a princess in the Magic Kingdom, and that was pretty awesome. There was the downside too, which was a certain amount of paranoia about people wanting to kidnap us, and you know, people wanting to trick us and people wanting to do us harm. We actually were embezzled by some untrusted colleague when I was 16. So those kinds of things happen, and they hurt. It's interesting, embezzlement feels like an impersonal thing. It's a very personal thing. Those are the kinds of things that really hurt and stay with you for a really long time, because you start to wonder, you know, if anybody's ever going to look at you and see a whole human being. And not like have little dollar bills floating around in their eyeballs when they talk to you. So that is kind of like the trick of it all, is to find a way to be an Abigail and a Disney, both together. And that's something that's sort of come to me as I've gotten older. I used to refer to Mickey Mouse as TFM, which is short for that mouse. Because he was everywhere, and I got so tired of him. And I had a couple of amazing moments that completely turned me around about him. One was in Morocco. We drove with my kids. We went there for spring break, and we drove deep, deep, deep into the Sahara, and this Casbah had almost totally been deserted. But there were still a few people living in the houses, and they were living in enormous poverty. And you know, goats and things going in and out of people's houses and so forth. And this really lovely woman invited us into her house to see it. And we followed her inside, and she had, you know, bare floors and chickens and things wandering in and out. She obviously didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. But she had 2 things on her wall, and one was a portrait of the king of Morocco, and the other was a picture of Mickey Mouse. And that was such an amazing moment for me, because I thought, what does that mean to her? What does that mean to her? Clearly, you know, I have a different set of associations with it, but this is obviously something.
Do you know what the symbolism was?
Well, here's the second amazing moment that I think explains it. So I went to Khartoum with the film, and my dear friend in Sudan, who's this feisty, amazing woman, picked me up at the airport, and we're driving in toward the hotel, which was owned by Gaddafi, by the way. And she says to me, you know, I said, we're stopping if we see Mickey Mouse, because now, by this time, I see him everywhere I go. Informal, hand-painted, you know, off-license pictures that decorate schools and just walls and people's shops, and I found them everywhere. And I said, so if we see Mickey Mouse, we're going to stop. And she said, what are you talking about? I mean, we're lucky we're not in burqas here. You know, you're not going to see Mickey Mouse. That's nuts. And I said, I guarantee we'll see him before we get to the hotel. And we made a bet. And like, before we finished shaking hands, I said, now stop the car, because there he is. And we saw him 3 times on the way to the hotel. And I said, I see him everywhere I go. And she said, you know, I think Mickey is a freedom fighter. And honest to God, I think Mickey is a freedom fighter, because you never see him in this way in a place where the company's there protecting its copyright. He's only there, you know, in really godforsaken places like the DRC and Liberia. I found him on a supermarket in the West Bank of Palestine, in Ramallah. I've seen him in Bali. I've seen him in all kinds of places, sometimes old, sometimes brand new. And he really does mean something to people.
And hope.
He means, I think, hope, and I think he means joy, and I think he means childhood, and I think he really is the last beloved American export. And I think that people reach for him because he's innocent of everything. And that was the moment where I integrated, you know, where I thought, okay, I can step into this Disney thing. I could be all right. Because that's something to really aspire to, something to be really, really proud of. I mean, I sometimes feel like I have to rescue Mickey from his corporate overlords. But it's interesting that his corporate overlords haven't managed to destroy that essence that seems to find its way into Haiti and all these crazy places where they haven't seen these films. I don't know how they find out about it, but there he is. So that's to me, that's the best thing. Better than getting it free, better than cutting the lines, although it's awesome. Better than Mickey without his head. I love that.